And I grew up in Harlem. I was born and raised in New York City. And Harlem was the pulse of Black America. Every time you looked around and were talking or writing about Harlem, my neighborhood, you know, the Black Power movement was there. I remember where I was when Malcolm X was assassinated. I remember where I was when Dr. King was assassinated. I remember where I was where Kennedy was assassinated. And so, you know, the Black Power movement was there, and everything was just so powerful, and, you know, that anger and everything. And I just wanted to, you know, scream, explode. And the way to do that was through writing.
Who's ready for some Girl Talk?
Welcome to Girl Talk. I'm Nicole D. Miller, author, blogger, speaker, hybrid book publisher, and your host. At Girl Talk, we are a safe space for female leaders to engage in healing and edifying conversation. This is your Me Too empathetic corner, where we have authentic and transformative dialogue designed to uplift and connect high-achieving women like you. Are you looking for a safe space to cultivate sisterhood with other like-minded female bosses? Leave your cape at the door and join the conversation. Hi guys, and welcome back to Girl Talk celebrating Toni Morrison. I'm your host, Nicole D. Miller. Now, if you're just tuning into this discussion and for some reason missed part one, make sure to run it back. We're in the midst of hearing from some very influential members of the writing community in Cleveland. Martin Sadler, Michelle R. Smith, and Rhonda Crowder have each joined me on the couch at Hexagon Books in Cleveland Heights. This exceptional dialogue is being held in conjunction with a statewide year-round celebration of the first Black female Nobel Prize recipient by Literary Cleveland and Ohio Humanities. This celebration is uber important to us in Cleveland because Miss Toni Morrison just so happens to be a Lorain, Ohio native. If you guys aren't familiar with the area, Lorain is located just outside of Cleveland, so yeah, we claim it. In our conversation, I'm sitting in awe because the ladies on this panel are all heavy hitters in the field of literacy. I think it's important to honor those who went before and do so by sharing space with them and uplifting Miss Morrison. It was truly an opportunity that blew me away. As I shared, I was a late bloomer when it came to discovering Morrison's writing, but even so, I can see that in my journey, I was right on time. Someone of her caliber deserves to be appreciated, kind of like a fine wine that ages. You don't want to waste an expensive top-shelf bottle on a novice drinker. That's how I feel we can view Morrison's work. So, if you're feeling a little intimidated to take a drink, this conversation is sure to assist you in learning the proper way to swallow Morrison. And speaking of swallow, it's time to sit back, relax, grab your favorite beverage, and join the conversation.
Hey. Well, in terms of my getting into the reasons why I would write, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And that's why I hit, that's what she said, I'm born in the 70s. I said, we know. And I'm a baby boomer, and I grew up in Harlem. I was born and raised in New York City, and Harlem was the pulse of Black America. Every time you looked around and were talking or writing about Harlem, my neighborhood, and you know, the Black Power movement was there. I remember where I was when Malcolm X was assassinated. I remember where I was when Dr. King was assassinated. I remember where I was where Kennedy was assassinated. And so, you know, the Black Power movement was there, and everything was just so powerful, and, that anger and everything. And I just wanted to, scream, explode. And the way to do that was through writing. And I went to high school in the Bronx, one of the worst high schools in the Bronx. Well, it's a whole nother story about how I got to the Bronx at high school. But anyway, they had a newspaper that you could join in the high school. And I decided that I wanted to write. But I wanted to write because in 1970, this wonderful magazine called Essence Magazine started. And there was the editor-in-chief was Marcia Ann Gillespie. And she wrote a monthly column in Essence Magazine that was so powerful, that was so affirming for Black women, that it was everything that I ever wanted to hear and see as a young Black girl growing up. And when I tell you that sister was on point, so I said, when I got to high school, I found that newspaper, I wanted my column. And I started writing a column, and that's how I started writing. And it was just getting that anger, everything that was that Black power movement. I had my fro, everybody was Black. We didn't do the what is that, the Pledge of Allegiance. We would stand up there with our fists and, just stand. We wouldn't even say, we would put our fists up and stand and wouldn't even say, it was just all of that Black power. And so my writing expressed who I was as a young Black woman, and, that anger and, my community that people were saying was horrible, that was this, was that. And I remember when I went to Howard, I would bring, everybody wanted to come to New York, do you see people shooting up? Do you see people dying on the street? Do you see people? I'm like, no, that is not my community. And so I would write about the community that I lived in. Everybody had a mother and father who worked. Everybody, were whole. We didn't have this thing that I would see in Life magazine and, all of this nonsense about this Black disfractured families and stuff. That was not the Harlem that I grew up in. And I wanted to write about that, and that's what I did. So.
Wow. I did not know I wanted to be a writer as a young person. I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be so many things. Writing was never crossed my mind. I did love to read. And my mother, and I believe my mother read to me in the womb. And I believe that she began to, she was reading a lot. When I look back in hindsight and thinking about what she was dealing with in her life at that time, reading was probably a comfort to her. So as a kid, I had all the books. I had Dr. Seuss, I had Curious George, I had the Cinderella. So I always read, I always begged somebody to read to me. And I eventually stopped reading books and I shifted to newspapers and magazines. And in hindsight, I realized that it was because I was not being introduced to books with people who looked like me. Like I stopped reading around them Judy Blume books. Because I remember reading those Judy Blume books, but I did not connect with those books. And when I think about it, those were the last books that I read. So I barely graduated from high school. Not because I wasn't smart, I didn't go to school. I became a product of my environment, and school was just no longer interesting. I get to the 12th grade, and they tell me I failed, that I'm not a senior, that I'm supposed to be in the 11th grade. And I'm like, oh, Lord, wait, because I had never had to repeat a grade. And so my homeroom teacher said, go to your counselor and have them recount your credits. And I had one credit that put me in the 12th grade. Wow. So I had to take 2 English classes, two history classes. Like I had a full schedule of classes in my 12th grade year, but I was determined to graduate on time. Good for you. And it was that year that I had a history teacher Alan Keller. I'll never forget this man. We are friends on Facebook to this day. But he assigned Richard Wright's Black Boy. And he's a white guy.
Okay.
He assigned Richard Wright's Black Boy, and we had to read that book. And I was probably the only one in the class that was just like devouring it and having conversation with him about it. And I'll never forget, he told me that I reminded him of Richard Wright, that I was very complex. And I was like, it went over my head. I'm like, okay, I'm just trying to get through this class and graduate. So when I graduated from high school, I did not go to college immediately because I was just happy to graduate. And in that time, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I started to realize that I had this natural ability to write, that it was my God-given talent. Because I love writing essays. I love reading books. I always got A's on my papers and things like that. And I was working for the Cleveland Children's Museum. It was a program through Youth Opportunities Unlimited. And part of the program, we had to, there was a mentorship embedded in it. And my mentor was the executive director of the museum. So I would have to go into her office, sit down on her couch, and talk to her every week. And one day she said, well, Rhonda, what do you want to be? And I did not want to tell this white woman that I didn't know. So the word writer just came out of my mouth. Now I had also seen Basic Instinct. I remember the movie Basic, and I was like, I think I could live that life. And I came back the next week, and she handed me a copy of Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. And she wrote in it, I hope Maya inspires you. And I read that book, and after reading that book, I picked up the phone, called Cuyahoga Community College, and said I want to come back to school. All right. And even through all of that, like, I still struck, because back then, what writer, it was the message, the narrative was that you don't make money as a writer. So I still entertained the thought of, well, maybe I could teach, or maybe I can do this, or maybe I could do that. And even when I learned about Toni Morrison, I said, well, maybe I can edit. But when I got to Cleveland State, they had a degree program that's an English degree with the creative writing track. And I said, that's my degree right there. I'm a go for that. And I've been very fortunate to, ever since I've graduated from college, have been writing and getting paid to write, and maybe not a whole lot, but something. Yes.
Wow. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. It's so inspiring. Like, wow, I should have brought the tissues. Okay. I'm a little younger, so I'm an 80s baby, 90s kid. I'm going to represent for the millennials out here, okay? And it was a lonely time in my childhood that brought me to books. I was bullied. I had a hard time at home. And I remember going to middle school and sitting by myself because I was too scared to be in the auditorium with my bullies and, be alone. And I'll read my books. And I was a reader, and my grandmother was a reader, and I was the only child. So that meant I was reading what she was reading. The Danielle Steeles. And the John Grishams. Yeah, I'm reading adult books.
And the Nora Roberts.
Yeah. But to your point, I didn't read the writers or the authors or the characters that looked like me until high school. And that was the climax of like the 90s classics, the Fly Girls, the Coldest Winter Ever. And I remember being in English class, devouring one of those books. And my English teacher called on me for a question. I didn't miss a beat, answered the question, and went back to my book. And he left me alone. And he actually was the reason I went to the college I went to. But I was so engaged in it, right? Never knowing that being an avid reader makes you a good writer. Had no idea.
That's right.
Absolutely does.
That's right.
All right. So the next question. Morrison was brave enough to go where her characters go. Are there any characters you've struggled with creating, or even a character that she created that you wrestled with? I already know mine.
So I taught a year of Morrison in 2020 for Literary Cleveland, so the year after she died, as a tribute to her. And I hadn't read all of them yet when I did it. And then I read them all in the order she wrote them. And I hadn't read Song of Solomon. I had read Sula. I had read The Bluest Eye. I had read Beloved and everything. And I hadn't read Song of Solomon. And then I did. And I cannot stand Milkman. I hate him. I cannot stand him. And when his sister cusses him out, it is one of my absolute favorite parts of any Toni Morrison. Don't even. So it was so hard to teach because everybody was like, "Oh my God, the complexity of Black masculinity," and I was like, "Milkman is a fuckboy." I was like, "Sure, okay, I guess." But I was like, and I do understand, because you have Guitar and you have his father and you have the 7 days, and all these is really a lot of representations of men. And now Molly Serpell, who wrote on Morrison, earlier today at City Club, said that that's what it was, right? It was Morrison's exploration of Black masculinity, and I get that. And she said it's a story of how a boy becomes a man, and I guess at the end, okay,
He
but
was
he
on the
spent a
titty
lot of
until
that
he was
book
5.
being.
And he was nasty.
Oh, he was off.
cousin.
He was, and not only did he sleep with her, but then he dogged her out, and she died. And it was just, out of all 11 of the books, and people do some really wild things in Morrison's book, but the one that I struggle with is, I'm like, I just don't.
When we were at the kickoff Wednesday, and they were talking about Song of Solomon, I said, wow, I don't remember Milkman that much. For some
You were
reason.
thinking about Pilot?
I remember Pilot very much, but the thing that I think I really connected with Song of Solomon was his sister, who was the writer, and she wanted to be a writer, and she couldn't break into writing, and she worked as an assistant to the white woman, and she would ride the bus I think she was cleaning. She was working as a cleaning person. And she would ride the bus to go to be the assistant to this white woman who was a very accomplished writer. Like, that's the thing that I remember most about Song of Solomon. But I was like, I can't, for some reason, I don't even remember. But I do remember he was on I do remember he was on the titty until he was 5.
That's why he's
5 years
Milkman.
old.
That's
Yes.
why he's Milkman.
That's why they named him Milkman.
No, I remember their father owned property. And the girls were kept close, didn't marry. And then the one sister got a boyfriend. But they were classist. They were elitist, right? Because they were property owning, business owning Black folks. And this man was not. And he saw his sister get out that man's car. And for no good reason other than he's just messy. He told his father, and his father, and his sister was like in her 30s or 40s or something, and lonely, and had been there. And he told his father, and his father forced her to break up with that man. And I just remember being like, I just could not. And so the other sister cornered him and cussed him out for it. She was like, our whole lives, all we've ever done is taking care of you. The whole house was aimed at you. And she had one thing. They gave her joy, and you took it from her. And I remember that, like, because I grew up in the 80s where the whole conversation was always, we have to save Black boys. We have to save Black boys, Black boys, Black boys. And I went to an all Black school, and the conversation was constantly about them. And it's like we didn't even exist. And then when we did exist, it was in the service of them. And so I felt that deeply. I was at a think tank 2 years ago, and everybody on the stage was like, these are the interventions that we're doing for Black boys. And I was like, there are girls. I just, I don't, dispute that it's hard to be Black and male, but it is hard to be Black in anything. Anything. And I just hate that, it skews. And so I felt that deeply because when I was growing up, that was it. Everybody was worried about Black boys being in gangs, and nobody really talked about what happened to us. It's one of the reasons why I love Toni Morrison, because a lot of her characters are women, and she does talk about the complexity of being both. You have that intersectional identity where you're Black and you're a woman, and you get pulled back and forth between, and there are two things that sort of people make difficult for you: the experience of gender and the experience of race. So yeah, that's why I'm not a fan.
Well, I'm gonna continue with that Song of Solomon, because Milkman's daddy, I think, was it Making Dead? Making Dead. First of all, Toni, the names that she gave to people. It was like Corinthians,
She was
Pilate, and but I didn't like him simply because he was, he was that person who was so into being different as an African American, and he wanted wealth. He hated the racism, but he was prejudiced his own people. So I could see the color issue, if you weren't light enough for my daughter, or if you weren't, so I saw that colorism in him. I saw the love of money, and I understand that, acquiring wealth and having something for that legacy to live on, but he was just ruthless. He was not nice. And then he hated his wife. And he treated his wife in such a terrible way. And I think it's because of, it's, as you all know, Toni, she never really she always wanted you to figure out the character more. So, I'm thinking, even though his wife had her issues and how she, the breastfeeding until the child was 2. Look, I had a sister-in-law who did that also, so I'm not even going to talk about that. But that actually can happen. But just Making Dead, he was just a horrible person. And yeah, he was a hard man. But then I have to look at the fact in which the time in which he lived, the time in which he grew up, what made him hard, what made him evil, what made him feel that, this colorism, I have to get this money, I have to treat you however way. But he was treated the same way. So why would you do what has happened to you to somebody else? So that character just really irritated me. And Milkman, I just couldn't I'm like, come on, Toni, his cousin, he knew that woman was his cousin, and that was his lover. Girl, bye. That's nasty. So I was like, wow. But I love it. That's the beauty of writing, So make it, complicated.
So it's her. Yeah.
I'll share as far as writing my own characters. That's why I really honor her for being able to write these complex, sometimes evil types of characters. And she goes there and she sits with it and she goes to that dark place. Because I struggled with that with my first novel. There was a character who was dealing with the grief of her mother, and I made her very flat because I just didn't want to go there. You have to walk that path as a writer and be there. It's similar to being an actor, I think, when you're taking that on. So, but when I watched in one of her interviews, she said she was like, well, if they could live it, then I could be there for a few years. And I'm like, hats off to you, because I could barely be there. And not to the extent of what she was writing about, right? The darkness.
But I think, too, with Morrison, I think American stories are very neat, and they have a pattern, and there's a happy ending, and there's a good and a bad, and it's very neat. And I think with her, it's so messy. So people are so human, and they are so flawed, and they are so complicated. But I don't think she passes. I think we do. Like, we enter into the stories and we go, I can't believe Sula slept with Neil's husband. I can't believe Setha did this. I can't believe that the whole community just watched while Pecola just lost her mind. We enter into it and we make moral judgments, but I don't think she does. And I think, and the hardest thing to do is to suspend that impulse to judge and to just sort of like question it, right? Like to be curious about it. Cause like you said, you leaning in people dating cousins and doing, and you like, and so you can just very easily say, that's awful, but that shuts down the conversation, right? Because you just decided and then it's done. But I think if you can lean in with curiosity and we think about, like you said, Macon Dead was the way he would, like you were saying, these things had happened. He had seen his dad get killed. They had lost their land. The white people had come. He was orphaned at a young age, and then he had to make his way. And so then we can think about why he is the way he is. Right. And so, and she does that with all of these characters, right? So they do, some of them really horrendous things or really violent things, really shocking things, but not without cause, not without reason. And then she leaves us to think about what that means. Like, this is what it's been to be Black in this country, in this place. And so then when you have relationships, you have children, these are some of the things that happen. And then we could think about why and what that means. And also think about how it resonates with us. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michelle. I'm like, because that helped me with Sula. I'm still tripping on Sula.
Yeah.
But then it's
Most
like, but
people
look
just-
at her family and look what they was on. So I'm like, okay, let me give her some grace. But I also think that's such a good tip for reading Morrison. You have to come in with a non-judgmental attitude.
You have to try, which
You
is
just got to
hard.
be like,
It's very
anything can
hard.
happen and you just can't judge.
Anything can
You
happen.
know, she tells our story. She tells our story. You know, she tells the Black story. And our stories, they're different, they're complex, you know, they're neat, they're not nice, and you know, there are things that actually happen, and we know that there are things that happen in families. You know, there are secrets that we all have kept, that families have, and Toni has unearthed a lot of that in her writing.
Next question. Morrison shared that she felt that she had a debt to those who went before her. Can you relate?
Oh, absolutely. I always remembered my mother would always say, if you have the opportunity to help somebody, do it. And when I became the acquisition editor and then the editorial director of the Pilgrim Press, I made sure that I got manuscripts written by African Americans. And not only that, I looked for artists because I wanted Black artists to do book covers. And I looked for copy editors because I wanted Black copy editors to edit the books. I'll never forget one of my dearest writers, Dr. Linda Hollies. She had written a book, and she just had all these wonderful ideas. And she had written a line that said something, a little something, something. And the copy editor who was white, she just didn't understand it. And she wanted to take that out. And then she wanted to, it was a phrase about, for Black families, a funeral is like a family reunion. She didn't understand that. And so those were instances where it's so important to be that gatekeeper, to be the person who can help to share. So I had to go into the, I'll never forget it, because Linda had written on the manuscript in red, and I literally was turning the paper around like this, reading what she had written to the copy editor. And so I'm tearing the paper around. And so, Linda basically said, I have a doctorate degree. I've written standard English, 200 plus pages, and I've put in a little something, something. She says something like, can I take it out? No, I'm not taking it out. And, and I wanted to scream, right? So I'm acting very professional, and I was cracking up. And I'm reading the paper because Linda had written in red all over. So I'm going all around the paper reading what Linda wrote to this copy editor. But that's the importance of having us there where nobody else is there. Because I remember having to fight for Black writers. We read. I had to prove that in the 1990s. We read. I had to actually show and prove that we have writers who can write and we can sell. And I tell you, everyone that I brought in outsold. When I tell you, Bishop Vashti McKenzie, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. I can go on and on. Reverend Linda Hollies, Dorothy Wimbush Riley. Those books sold out of the kazoo. And if I weren't there, We have to be those gatekeepers. We have to be there. And it's not to exclude others, because we had white writers who were excellent, who I loved, who some I still stay in touch with. But when you don't have the perspective and the understanding of the other, and that not only, African Americans, I wanted to make sure the Native American Indians were writers. I wanted to make sure that whole gamut, because their voices are so important. And if you don't hear that, if you don't see it, if you don't see their art, if you don't read what they have, how would you know? And I can't tell you, look at the hundreds of thousands of wonderful manuscripts that are declined every day. It's every day.
So definitely feel indebted. I worked for a Black newspaper, and, I just remember, I tell people all the time that I learned so much about Black history, Black culture, Black life, despite all my years in formal education at that newspaper. And when I arrived there and started learning about people and the accomplishments of African Americans, and even the history of the paper, that paper is this year 116 years old. And there was we was told that it has never missed a print run. So you're talking about a Black newspaper with Black people, majority Black staff, and how messy we can be, under-resourced, all of these things, and we never missed a print run. We all came to work every day with this "not on my watch" kind of attitude. We're not gonna miss the print run. We're not gonna miss the print run. So always felt the sense of indebtedness, and because that I never really wanted to be a journalist anyway. When I did get a taste of journalism, and I have really enjoyed being a journalist, because I have been able to tell the stories of my community, and I took on the responsibility that this is my service to my community.
So for me, the indebtedness is two forms. So one is when you say people don't think Black people read, and it's just not understanding our history. It was illegal for us to read. And so one of the biggest sort of expressions of emancipation was literacy. And so we are people who have always valued literacy. We haven't always had access. We haven't always had opportunity, but we've always been literate people. And we've always been people who create in words, right? And that's the tradition. And so I feel beholden to that. The other thing is, I was a good student, and it was just kind of a fluke. Because the system is made not for us to function well, not for us to succeed, but I was. And so when I started to teach, I felt like I owed it to my students. I always wanted to be in classrooms where there were Black kids, and I wanted them to understand that a lot of the difficulty that they were experiencing was systemic and structural. It wasn't them, because a lot of times people walk into classrooms and they treat Black kids like it's you. You don't have what it takes. And I always felt beholden to tell them, no. A lot of what's happening is, like you said, these materials you can't relate to, you can't resonate, you're in a poor neighborhood, you don't have enough funding, you don't have the tools, you don't have the resources. It's not your failure, it's the failure of the system. I felt like I owed that to them, because I understood that. Like, I had gone to Case and I sat next to kids who were at this school. They were not smarter than the kids that I had been in high school with. Their parents could afford to send them there. They had gone to a better school. They had better opportunities. So I feel like that was another thing that I owed. And then the last thing is, my great-grandmother lived to be 100. Wow. She was born in 1915 in Alabama, and she came here when she was a young woman, and she was the reader. And we all read because of her. And in the end, she had glaucoma and cataracts, and she couldn't read. And it was so sad, because she always read. But I remember when I started to write, and I told her that I wrote, and she looked at me and she said, I think I would have been a writer if somebody had told me that I could be. And I just remember she said that to me, and then I was like, well, then I will be. I owe it to her to be. because she didn't get to be. So there's a lot of different levels of sort of owing to the community, to the future, to the past, to my family, for me. Yeah.
I need some tissue.
I know, I should have brought them. Well, I'll share, which is a little bit similar to what you shared. So I remember working at a small business firm. I was a bookkeeper. I was under a lot of fire, a lot of racism, a lot of prejudice. My days were dwindling there. And I was sitting there and I really felt a very strong impression on my heart, which I believe was God speaking to me, telling me that so many of my ancestors were gifted to write, but because of the laws, their gifts were buried with them. And I thought about how many were, on the slave trade, how many just weren't taught to read or allowed to. And I have this opportunity that they didn't get. And I do believe those gifts are passed down generationally, like you said with your grandmother. And I resonate with that with my grandmother. And another moment that stands out to me, I was at a networking event. I did a short business coaching session with someone. And they always tell you, what is your why when you're an entrepreneur? Because I'm not just an author, I'm an indie author, which means you're an entrepreneur. So you out here hustling, getting it, marketing, doing the thing, okay? And she's like, what is your why? And I struggled with that, but I realized because I kept looking, I didn't have children. So many of the women in my family had children they sacrificed for. My mother did it. My grandmother did it. Her mother did it. And I didn't have that. And I struggled with that. And I realized my ancestors are my why. So just those two moments to tie it back to, as Black people, I feel like we have this innate understanding of purpose and a communal mindset that we owe our freedom and our liberty to those who went before us. And because we're writers like Toni Morrison did, we're actually activists in our writing. And so I won't go on a tangent, but I'll leave it at that. We're going to wrap up this portion of the conversation to give our audience a chance to ask the panelists anything that they want to ask or share anything that's on their heart to honor Miss Toni Morrison today. I don't know about you guys, but one of my favorite parts of this conversation was listening to Mrs. Sadler recap the throwback days of Harlem. Part of that experience was impactful for me because, as some of you know, I have a series called Devon's Cafe. Devon's is rooted in Harlem. All of the ladies were able to contribute to the richness of this discussion by giving us insight into our history as Black writers. Whether it was their personal journeys into becoming writers, how their passion for activism was displayed in their writing, how Morrison's example set the bar in their field, or how her personal life influenced their self-perceptions. One important note that Rhonda made was that she stopped reading as a youth because she couldn't find books where characters looked like her. She gave a raw account of struggling academically as well. Her testimony reiterates that excellence and success cannot be thwarted. No matter what roadblocks emerge, there are always other paths to purpose. Michelle brought up a great point, that Black boys and girls can be viewed as less intelligent and not as invested in. So she makes sure to send those positive messages to our youth. When they're told you can't, she tells them you can and you will. Rhonda's testimony confirms that grades don't indicate intelligence. And Michelle is doing the work with our youth for them to receive the opportunities of their more privileged counterparts. One of the suggestions made when reading Morrison is to approach her work with a non-judgmental attitude. That can be hard for most of us. Morrison didn't write neat and tidy stories, as Michelle mentioned. She was more interested in what her readers felt the outcome was, as opposed to giving them a satisfying ending. Morrison wanted to capture the complexity of humanity and was less concerned about selling books and pleasing critics. She wrote with a deeper purpose, and I think that purpose was for her readers to understand that you never know what your choices will be until you're faced with the level of oppression that our ancestors had. One of the things I appreciate most about Black culture is that, as horrendous as our history is, we have those before us to pay homage to. We have a reason to think about others outside of ourselves. Kim was a gatekeeper and able to open doors for Black writers, giving voice to their work just as Morrison did. Rhonda fervently worked the historical Black newspaper Call & Post, featuring Black stories. Michelle uses her poetry to sound the alarm on the atrocities happening in our nation and communities. I have a publishing house that ensures quality, ethical publishing for faith-based writers. We are all walking in the footsteps of Morrison and many others who took the brunt of the persecutions and injustices that are now systemic. But as you can see, so many of us stumbled into purpose. We didn't set out to be writers. How can you look at your journey and see that you didn't seek out your purpose, but purpose found you? Or are you still waiting to be found? One revelation I had years ago that I shared is that my ancestors had their gifts buried with them. Friend, don't let your gifts be buried with you. Seek God and how you can be a world changer in your own world. That's all for now. All of our information for the panelists is in the show notes, so feel free to contact them. And remember, I attract amazing women doing amazing things. So guess what, sis? That means you're amazing. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. To continue the conversation, join our Girl Talk community by following @GirlTalkCLE on Instagram and Facebook.com/HTOHB, where you can join the Girl Talk Facebook group. You can follow me personally on Instagram @HTOHB, on Facebook.com/HTOHB, and at YouTube.com/@HTOHB. Feel free to reach out via email info@indiemillerpublishing.com. If you're a writer who wants to take the next steps into becoming a published author, you can book a one-on-one consultation at indiemiller.pub. Just let me know you heard about my publishing house through Girl Talk, and I'll give you a 50% discount on our one-on-one. If you'd like weekly inspirational nuggets, you can subscribe to my blog and monthly newsletter at NicoleDmiller.com, where you can learn more about me and my writings. Till next time.